chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a good understanding of the fascinating world of chess. I am George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in the McKay Complex at the university. And with me today at the Fitchburg Access Television Production Center is our award-winning director, Darren Dame of Fitchburg. Assisting him in the control room is three-time Wachusett Chess Club champion Larry Gladding of Leominster, formerly of Fitchburg. And behind the cameras and following all the action, our longtime Wachusett Chess Club member Brian Bigelow of Fitchburg and longtime FATV volunteer Andy Hawthorne. And last but not least is my trusty co-host and a longtime associate, one of the most avid chess players in North Central Massachusetts, Rick Evans of Fitchburg. Welcome, Rick.
Good to be here, George.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Rick.
Same here.
Well, Rick, you know, in a couple of weeks, actually August 12th to be exact, we're going to honor a chess player who is no longer with us. He passed away in December 2013, but we are honoring him with a memorial tournament, and that is International Master John Grefe. John Grefe is one who could have become a grandmaster if he had continued playing competitively in chess. But do you know anything about John Grefe? You never met him, of course, because...
well, I know that he was an international master. He never tried to be a grandmaster, to my understanding. I understand he won the U.S. Open at one point, and that...
Well, not the U.S. Open, but the U.S. Championship.
U.S. Championship.
It was a closed... Yeah, there was a U.S. He did play in U.S. Opens,
yeah.
And I think he never won the U.S. Open, but he did win or tied for first in a U.S. Championship. You know what year that was?
Was that 73?
1973. Yeah. And you know who he tied with? Yeah, he tied with
Lubomir Kavalek,
who was a grandmaster.
Yes.
Yes. So that was in 1973 in El Paso, Texas. It was it was supposed to be a 14-player U.S. Championship round robin. They ended up with 13 players because one of the players dropped out at the last minute, so they had to give a bye every round to somebody who had to sit out every round. But he scored 9.5 points. That is, John Grefe scored 9.5 points out of 12 to tie with Lubomir Kavalek for the championship. He also, 2 years prior to that, came in first place in the National Open, which I believe was held in Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure it was held in Las Vegas in 1971. But, as you pointed out, he was an international master. The World Chess Federation awarded him that title in 1975.
Yes, 75.
Exactly.
He was an author. I think he had at least four books to his credit.
At least 4 books. In fact, I know at least 2 of the books I know was Mastering the Openings, and he also wrote a book called the Chess Tactician's Handbook. Yeah. And also he wrote a book on the Sicilian, the offbeat Sicilian, the Sicilian defense, unorthodox ways to win with white. So yes, he was a very accomplished chess writer.
And quite a tactician.
A great tactician.
Good tactical
player. Well, his style. Yeah. He was a very aggressive
tactical player.
But, you know, he was born in Hoboken, New Jersey. Now, when you think of Hoboken, New Jersey, is there some celebrity that comes to mind?
You think of Old Blue Eyes.
Yes, Frank Sinatra was a native of Hoboken. Yeah. So John Grefe was born and raised in Hoboken. And you know what he did? A couple of months before his 17th birthday, he came to Fitchburg. He came to Fitchburg to play in the 4th Central New England Open Chess Championship, which was held that year in June 1964. At the
Unitarian Church, right?
At the
in 1964.
Right, at the Upper Common, the church at the Upper Common.
In the summer, but I think it was
June. Yeah. June. But by the way, you know who played that same year, a couple of months before John Grefe came here? In March 1964? A former world champion, a prodigy himself, Bobby Fischer.
Well,
Bobby
that's what
Fischer
I was
played
gonna-
at the.
I couldn't remember the year, but he's one of the
same
most
year. It
famous
was
people
March.
to come into town.
It was
for
March
sure,
2nd,
yeah.
1964.
Yeah.
Fischer beat Grefe coming to Fitchburg, but Grefe got here when he was a teenager. He didn't start playing. John Grefe didn't start playing U.S. Chess Federation rated tournaments until he was 15. But again, when he was 16, he traveled. I don't know how he got here. He might have taken a bus, but he got here. He realized there was a very big chess tournament being held in Fitchburg in 1964.
Well, and there must be a reason why Fischer and Grefe and other great players at the time would
Well,
come to
at that
Fitchburg.
time, because at that time, during the 1960s, Fitchburg was the chess capital of Massachusetts. The big tournaments, especially a tournament called the Central New England Open Championship, was held here right in Fitchburg. And then it moved to the Holiday Inn in the late 60s, early 70s. We actually found a nice playing site at the remember the old Holiday Inn?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, which is now, I think, the Manor Assisted Living.
Yes, assisted living.
Routes 2 and 12, yeah. So, but it started in Fitchburg, and Fitchburg actually was a hotbed of activity only because of the Wachusett Chess Club. The Wachusett Chess Club, which was based in Fitchburg, sponsored this Central England Open that John Grefe played in. Okay, so we're going to present to our viewers a game that John Grefe played in this 1973 U.S. Championship that he tied with Lubomir Kabalik for first. And this is a game in which Grefe had the white pieces.
Yes.
So what was his first move in this game against Walter Brown? Wait a minute. Didn't we do our last program about Walter Brown?
Yes, we did.
Walter Brown was a 6-time U.S. champion.
Yes.
But John Grefe played him in the 1973 U.S. Championship. By the way, as I say, we'll talk about this game as we go along, but there's some interesting comments I want to make about this game.
You might say that Brown came to Grefe in this game.
Yes, he did come to Grefe. Very good. I like it very much. So, what did John Grefe play with his first move against Walter Brown?
Well, he occupied the center with e4 as his first move.
Okay, so he played pawn to e2 to e4. Okay. In response to that, Walter Brown played the pawn to c5. All right, so that was his move. Now, by the way, what is this? What sort of defensive move is this?
This is the Sicilian defense.
And this
is
is
probably the most common response to the e4 opening.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think against the king pawn opening, or the pawn to e4, this is probably the most commonly played defense, and one of the oldest. It's one of the old. This goes back at least 400 years. It was played by who was playing this? Well, the Sicilians, the Italians. It goes back actually to the 16th century at least. The Italians knew about this defense, and they were playing this, and that's why we use the term the Sicilian defense. It's known internationally as the Sicilian defense. Okay, so what did John Grefe play on his second move?
A very common second move to bring the knight to f3.
Okay, so he's developing a knight. It's always good. In the opening, what's important? To get
the pieces out
developed
and try to influence the center.
Okay. Now, black has a number of choices here. Could play the pawn to e6. That's an option.
Yes,
Could play the knight to c6. That's another option.
Sure.
Could also play probably a6 is a possibility.
The O'Kelly Sicilian.
The O'Kelly Sicilian. G6, an accelerated fianchetto.
Accelerated
dragon variation.
Sure.
But what Walter Brown played was d6. A good move.
I like that move.
Bobby Fischer liked this move too.
I favor this move.
You like this move?
I'm not a particularly great player, but
all right. Well, what did John Grefe do? All right, you like this move. Yes, Bobby Fischer likes this move.
And probably the most common response by white is to advance the d pawn from d2 to d4.
Okay.
Again, challenging the center and expressing a willingness to trade off pawns. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what Brown did was just simply a capture. The pawn on c5 captures the pawn on d4. C takes d4 was Brown's move. All right. So
and the knight takes back, so the knight on f3 takes on d4.
Okay, so knight takes on d4. All right, so now what Brown did on his fourth move was play knight f6, which attacks the pawn, unprotected pawn, on e4.
And the obvious response is to defend that pawn by bringing the knight to c3.
Yeah, that's a natural move.
Another developing move that.
I mean, there were other ways to
protects the
defend that pawn. We could have
Sure.
actually played the bishop to d3, but this
That would be an ugly move.
isn't it wise to develop knights before bishops? Is that actually advocated? Isn't that?
Was that advocated by, was that Philidor or Lasker that advocated?
Well, I think they all advocate.
They
I think
all
actually
advocated
all
that,
strong players, I think, advocate develop your knights before your bishops. Yeah, because your knights have limited, range, where the bishops have a much wider range. Okay, so what Brown did in response to knight e3? Well, he played a6. Now he could have played other moves. He could have played e6, but he played a6. Now what is this? What does this move do?
I believe that this enters a variation called the Najdorf.
Yes, this is known as the Najdorf variation. Now, this is named after a Polish-born Argentinian grandmaster by the name of Miguel Najdorf. And his name has been attached to this variation. Mm-hmm. And this was also a favorite variation of world champion Garry Kasparov, also world champion Bobby Fischer, mm-hmm. and a number of top world-class players.
Even today, it's probably one of the most common
yes, it is.
lines that
Among
you see.
True.
At club level and at grandmaster level.
Yes,
it's
you'll see
one of the most common. I
yes,
think.
it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Anyone that plays chess and knows they're going to face a Sicilian defense should be prepared to face the Najdorf variation. Mm-hmm. All right, so now, what are the now, it's White's move. Mm-hmm. It's Grefe's move. Before we play what he played, mm-hmm. what are the options here for White? Can you tell me some of the moves that actually White can play in this position?
He could enter an English attack setup.
Well, play some of the moves. Just show me some of the moves.
Ultimately, this pawn is advanced to support the center, and the dark squared bishop can be centralized and so on. I don't know all the moves of the English attack,
let me
but
show
something
the
along
viewers.
those
I'm going to show the
lines.
viewers quickly that bishop c4, placing the bishop on
that's
this.
Bobby Fischer.
Bobby Fischer like this.
Yeah,
known as the Sozin.
The Sozin attack.
Sozin attack.
Sozin
okay.
attack, yeah.
Another move that's playable is e6, which is known as the Scheveningen,
yeah.
which is actually
they say only the Dutch can pronounce that word.
Only a Dutchman can
only
pronounce
a Dutchman can pronounce it.
Also
properly,
possible was to play something like knight c6 was playable. Also g6 is g6 playable? Yeah.
Well, that would be a Dragadorf or something.
Yeah,
at this point.
you could actually try to transpose it into a dragon variation. But what did Grefe play though?
He brought the dark squared bishop out to g5.
A very active move.
Yeah.
In fact, it is the most active move for White here, for the bishop to come and
I
attack.
think the most common, isn't it? The most common.
Well, yeah, I think it is. This is considered the main line.
The main line, the classical.
Now, what is White's threat? By playing the bishop to g5, what is White threatening to do here?
Ruin the pawn structure.
Yes.
And,
If that bishop were able to take that knight, we'd have to take back with one of these pawns, but it's going to double these pawns. And what we were told about double pawns? Shouldn't we avoid having our pawns doubled?
Right, yes.
All right, so to avoid that, and Brown did it, to avoid it, he played e6. Mm-hmm. So that was his sixth move, and now it's White's seventh move.
And so there's another pawn advance influencing the center by Grefe here, advancing the pawn from f2 to f4.
Okay, so he's
supporting the bishop
another
at the same time.
All right, so now what Brown does, he plays bishop e7 and breaks this pin on the queen. All right, bishop e7.
And now Grefe develops his queen to f3, which I think is the most common line.
Yes, because what is the plan? Why is that queen going to f3? To prepare what? What is White preparing to do next?
Well, my impression is that White is preparing a king-side attack here.
Okay,
and
but
he would like to castle queenside to tuck his king away, and then go ahead with start rolling these pawns and so on the king side.
That is very true.
After that's done,
that queen moves to f3 to vacate that square d1, so the
king can castle.
White can castle queenside. Okay, so what Brown did after queen f3, he could have played what is a very natural move, played queen c7, which is seen very often. In fact, in many Sicilian defenses, you will see the queen on c7. But this queen on c7 also stops the bishop from getting to c4.
I think it is the classical line.
Yes, this is the classical line.
That's the most common classic.
Okay, this is what Brown did, though. Brown, instead of playing queen c7, plays h6 and attacks the bishop. Now, this actually is not as commonly seen as queen c7, but this actually now has the name attached to it, the Brown variation, because Brown analyzed this, many years ago, and said that this move has merit, h6. All right, so what is White going to do? His bishop's under attack.
I don't think that it would be advantageous to take the knight.
No.
I think it would be a better idea to simply retreat the bishop back to h4, and that was done.
Right, and that's what he did. All right, so now it's Brown's move, his ninth move, and now he plays queen c7, which he could have played before he played h6, but he plays it now. All right, so what is Grefe going to do now?
And then continuing with that idea of tucking the king away safely, Grefe castles queenside.
Okay. So this is all standard theory. This has been played, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times around the world. All right, so now it's Black's move, and Black now develops this knight on b8 and does not bring it to c6, but brings it to d7, knight bd7, which protects and adds further protection on the knight on f6, but also adds further protection, stops any advance of this pawn in the center here with e5. Yes, so that's also a very good developing move.
Yes, fine move.
It's okay. So what is Grefe going to do?
Grefe develops the white squared bishop to e2.
Okay. All right. So now, here's what Brown does. He plays the rook to b8. Now, does this tip you off as far as what he plans to do here, playing the rook to b8?
Well, it's first come, first serve in this kind of position, as they say, which means that both sides are going to start rolling their pawns against the opponent's king, and whoever gets there first is probably...
No, that's a very correct description of what happens in the Sicilian defense. It's first come, first serve. Whose attack is going to be faster? Black's attack is the queen side. He's going to attack on the queen side by advancing this b pawn, and of course White wants to attack on the king side. All right, so what does Grefe do now after rook b8?
He moves the queen to g3, attacking the pawn on g7.
All right, so the pawn on g7 is undefended, and what Brown does in response to that, he brings the rook over to g8 and protects it. Rook g8 protects the pawn on g7.
And in analyzing this game, the computer did not like that move.
The computer liked something better. What was it?
The computer preferred that Black just castle kingside here.
Yes. Just simply castling on the side that Black expects White to attack on was a safer course of action than what he did. By playing the rook to g8, by the way, and he already moved the rook to b8, he's forfeited castling. There's no castling prospects at all.
The king is left in the center of the board.
The king is now...
That's a dangerous...
that's always dangerous. You have to leave a king in the center. But he's playing defensively. Brown is playing, defending that pawn on g7. So what did Grefe do now after...
Grefe continues to develop. He gets the king's rook into the game by bringing it over to f1.
Okay, rook h f1. Okay, now here comes a very bold move. Very brazen move by Brown. Well, before I play what he did in the game, what he should have done, I think, is just advance with his plan of playing b5 on the queen side. Remember, his attacking chances over here
are on the queen side.
So he has to advance here. Yeah. If he plays that pawn, over here, he's going to dislodge. If he dislodges his knight here on c3, this pawn on e4 is going to drop, and the queen will come under attack. So this would have seemed to be a better course of action to advance b5, but instead Brown played g5. He actually is responding on the king side. This is rather actually dangerous, isn't it?
Yes, I think I prefer the move you suggested.
Yes. All right, so what did John Grefe do now?
Grefe takes the pawn with the f-pawn, so it's the f-pawn takes the pawn on g5.
Okay. Now in response to that, Brown now plays his knight on d7 to e5. Okay, plays it there. Remember, it's White's move. Remember, this pawn cannot capture this knight because
of the pin.
Because of the pin.
Yeah, the pawn is pinned.
All right, so he plays. He's actually getting the knight more centralized, possibly to bring the knight over to c4.
Possibly.
Yes. But again, he has to do something with the B pawn advancing there. So what did John Grefe do now after knight e5?
He challenges that newly posted knight by bringing his knight back from d4 to f3.
Okay, so he retreats the knight and is offering actually the exchange. It's giving black the opportunity to take the knight on f3. But here is what Walter Brown did. He now plays b5, which he should have done earlier. Yeah.
But the computer does not seem to favor, my analysis with the software suggests that this is not the greatest move that could have been played.
The computer actually assesses this as not actually
a weaker move. The computer thought that black should have retrenched by moving a knight to d7.
Oh, I see. Moving. Oh, as far as moving.
I think the king's knight. If I remember
instead of b5.
The knight on f.
That is f. Bring the knight.
Bring it over to d7.
Okay.
That's what the computer
bring the knight back
suggested was the better move. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can believe that.
Yeah.
But instead he played b5. Brown is playing b5, and now what does John Grefe play?
Well, he takes that knight that's posted so strongly on e5 with his knight. That was on f3.
So now we have choices here. Brown has to make a choice here. Mm-hmm. He could, here in this position, take this pawn on d6 and capture the knight like this. He takes e5.
And had he done that, the computer analysis would show that his game would only be slightly inferior.
He'd be only slightly inferior. Okay. But he didn't do that.
No.
Okay. So he left the knight on e5. So what did he do? Instead of taking the knight on e5, well, he advances the pawn here on b4 and attacks this knight on c3 because he realizes if this knight moves, this knight will be able to take on e4, win that pawn, and attack the queen. Mm-hmm. So he plays b4.
And this is where the tactics of the game become sharp. The computer analysis thought that this was a very inferior move, and it may be the losing move of the game to have pushed that pawn, at least according to what computers can show you today.
So Brown was probably anticipating this knight would move?
Yes, I think so. But he got a big surprise here.
So he overlooked White's next move.
Yeah, and actually, Grefe's move, although very good, the computer even suggested there's a better move to what Grefe played, but Grefe took the pawn on f7 with the knight.
Okay, so he's taking here. Okay, he's taking here. Now, can't we in this position just simply take? Could we take the knight? He didn't do that. In this position, if Brown had played this, let's see this. We're going to actually show what Brown actually played, but he didn't play this. Why didn't he play this? Is there a reason why he didn't play that?
I don't know exactly, but I mean the bishop can come in with check.
The bishop
and that's
check.
A pretty strong move.
And the king certainly cannot move over to the g file because now we would take the pawn would take the knight on f6 with check.
It looks like the start of a strong
attack.
Yeah, right.
This is going to win. He actually on this check he'd be forced to move back here, right, like this, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, I think I can still take here. We can take here, allow the queen check, and then go down here with check. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, this would win. This, in fact, he's going to threaten the queen. This pawn that's on e7 down to e8 with the queen, and it's over. All right. So that didn't happen though.
No,
all right. So
let's go back to
let's go back. So the knight is here. Mm-hmm. The knight had just taken on f7. So what Brown did instead, he played the b pawn on the pawn b4, takes the knight on c3. All right, that's his move. Now what does Grefe do?
Grefe takes the knight with the pawn on g5.
Okay, so g takes f6. Wow. Wait a minute. He's allowing this rook to capture the queen, win the queen.
Yes, he is.
Okay, and that's what happened.
That's what happened.
Because, first of all, the rook is under attack here, for one thing. Mm-hmm. So rook takes g3. That's Brown's 18th move. And how does Grefe continue here?
He continues by taking the bishop with the pawn.
Okay, so f takes e7, all right. All right, well, he realizes, okay, he realizes he would lose this rook which stood here. He figures, okay, if I'm going to lose this rook, I might as well lose it as an exchange. I might as well get something for it. So he goes back with the rook and blocks this defense of this pawn on e7 with the rook, allowing Grefe to do what after rook g5?
He simply takes the rook with the bishop.
Okay, and then what Brown does is just simply take back this way. H takes g5, okay, and how does Grefe continue now?
He calls check with the knight by taking on d6.
Okay, so there's a check here. And of course, we're not going to take this knight with the queen because the rook would just capture the queen, and white would be a full piece ahead, full rook ahead, with an easy one gain. So he can't take the knight with the queen. No. What happens if he were to take the pawn with the king? Let's say king takes. All right, he resigned in this position.
Yes, he did.
Let's show our viewers why the king does not take the pawn on e7. So king takes e7, he wins the pawn. Now how does white continue the attack?
Well, I suppose the rook could come down and call check on f7.
Right, okay, forcing only one move here, king d8, okay, and how do we continue here? There's different ways to continue.
Yeah, well, there's a discovered check in the wings here if that knight moves.
Well,
so
let's
the
mop up.
question is,
actually,
where is it best to move the knight to get the discovered check?
Yeah, where is it best to move?
Or
okay, let's give one of the variations. How about this?
You could take the bishop.
How about just simply taking the knight takes c8? The discovered check is with the rook here. Okay, and what if actually the king just simply takes c8? How do we continue here?
Well, probably you could call check with a bishop.
Bishop here, check. Yeah. King cannot move, so black has to block. The block is with maybe rook here. We take here. And how do we continue?
Maybe with check.
Yes.
On
f8, which forces the queen to block. The only move available is queen here, right?
Yes.
And now we just mop up. We can actually simply take. We can take with the queen. The rook takes queen check here. King up, rook here. King here, and then the bishop can take. The rook can take. I mean, this game would have been done because white has overwhelming material. So that's how the game ended. So this was how many moves? 21 moves?
21 moves.
John Grefe won this?
Yeah.
So this was a real shock. The reason this was a big shock is that Walter Brown was considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the Najdorf variation. John Grefe studied. He knew that he would be facing Walter Brown in this U.S. championship, so he studied the Najdorf variation and probably, anticipated Brown would play his favorite variation, h6, and pulled off a big upset. John Grefe was the lowest rated player in this U.S. championship. I believe his rating was like 2,200, which is the lowest you can be to become a master, 2,200. Of course, the highest rating he achieved shortly after this tournament was rated.
It was in the 2,600.
2655. Yeah. That's a very high rating, and he accomplished that. But as I pointed out, he chose not to really pursue a chess career. Here's a photo of John Grefe on the left. Sitting on the right was a Grandmaster Edmar Mednes, who was a very accomplished chess writer. Talk about people who've written books on chess. Edmar Mednes is one. So we hope our chess chat fans enjoyed the game that you and I presented to them, the game from the 1973 U.S. Championship, John Grefe versus Walter Brown. And we hope to see our chess chat fans next time for another edition of Chess Chat.